What's up, everybody? It's Benjamin here, reading the Word of God. We're in 1 Corinthians chapter 5 today. Let's dive into this thing here. Paul begins to talk to Corinth about the actual report of the unchecked sin in the church. And he starts out in 5 saying, "I can hardly believe the report about the sexual immorality going on among you." He said some things that even pagans don't do. He's saying, I've never heard anything like this. In Corinth, there is a man who was sleeping with or having an affair with his stepmother. And Paul says, you guys are so proud in Corinth, so proud of yourselves, but you should be mourning in sorrow and shame for this man. And you should remove this man from your church. Now, this is where things get a little serious. We see, and we don't like this text. And you should remove this man from your fellowship. But before we claim that we just don't like it, let's see what Paul is actually talking about. He says, he draws a connection. Says this sin is like yeast being dropped into a batch of dough. Does the yeast not cover the entire dough? Does it not take over the entire dough? And so this sin is with the church. He's saying this sin will devour your church, so you must cut off this yeast. Then you will be like a fresh batch of dough made without yeast, which is what you really are, because Christ has been sacrificed for us. So he's saying you have to remove this sin in order to get back to what you really are. Now we struggle with this because of judgment in the church, which Paul gets to later, and all of these things. But surely you can see what Paul is talking about here. He says, I am not talking about unbelievers. I'm not talking about someone who doesn't know the Word of God or doesn't believe. He is saying, I am talking about someone who claims to be a follower of Christ. He said, I've told you already to stay away from people like this who claim to be followers of Christ, but engage in sexual sin, or are greedy, or worship idols, or are abusive, or drunkard, or cheat people. He says, don't even eat with such people. Try and paint a picture of how big this is and how it affects our church today. I believe that this text is why people started wearing masks in the church, because there was a real church discipline. There was once a church that knew its members through and through. And let's not pretend that Corinth is a small place. It was not. It was a port town of large city. Yet they knew what was going on in their church, so much so that Paul, who's not even there, knows what's going on in the church. So part of it is we see our churches don't today, for the most part, don't know their congregations, what's going on in their lives and the sin that they're battling. Secondly, it's important to note that there's a process to church discipline, which Paul talks about, confronting it. But here we know that Paul is saying that they must remove this man from the church, so we know that the process has already been